Today is December 4th, 2019. Welcome to Design Systems Community. Hey! Before I tell you who I am, or what we are, or what we do, or how are we today, welcome to Shopify. Here, Shopify is graciously hosting us, and we're going to talk to you about two really great talks about scaling design systems and starting them too. A design system is an awesome opportunity for any business of any size to make things consistent, design approved, accessible, and many other things which I'm about to get into. The first of which is starting and scaling. You got to start from somewhere. And here at Design Systems Community, we start with a land acknowledgement. This is super important because here we're standing on unceded territory. The land I'm standing on today is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. This land acknowledgement is merely a first step, but we need to enable opportunities for all groups. And there goes the music. The code of conduct has been in effect the moment you stepped onto the fourth floor of this building, and that is respect others. Keep it legal. Play nice. Uphold the conduct and our values available on our website, and protect your privacy, please. All right, time for the most important essentials. Restrooms are to your right, past the kitchen. Food and refreshments at the kitchen. Please be respectful of the space. If you have paper plates, please put them in the green bins, which are deep into the kitchen, very deep. And if you have any questions, look for the yellow shirt where you can find organizers or volunteers. We're here to help. Also, did I mention there's Wi-Fi? The SSID is Shopify Guests. Okay, finally, who are we? I'm Enrico Sacchetti. I'm one of the co-hosts of Design Systems Community. My Twitter handle is EnricoTrain. And over here, to my right.
Hi, I'm Lucy, designer at Shopify.
Come to the camera view.
And my name is Varun. I'm a product manager for the TELUS design system, and I'm super excited to be here.
Thanks for getting to know us. And now for our values. When you're building design systems or anything really, we're going to make sure that we share everything. So, Lucy, share our values.
Yes. Can you guys hear me? Yes, you can. So our values, I just wanted to I'm not going to read them all. You guys can just check it out. But I wanted to kind of get into why we have them. And so when we started our, little adventure integrating this meetup, I think the first thing we wanted to do was create these values, something that we can, use as resources on what we stand for, what we believe in, and how we would conduct ourselves. So we are, holding ourselves accountable to this and all these values. And so what I ask of you guys, it's not just for us. What I ask of you guys is to hold us accountable to these values too. So if we're not, being diverse or inclusive in the stuff that we provide to you and share, then call us out. So today's meetup is brought to you by Contentful and Shopify. And as well, we wanted to thank all of our volunteers. They're all wearing black shirts with the cool designs, if I do say so myself. Thank you for the volunteers, and thank you to our sponsors for hosting us today and letting us do what we do. So I'm just going to quickly talk about Shopify. Yes, this was sponsored by Shopify, but specifically Shopify UX. So just a little bit about Shopify. We have over 400 UXers here. So it's a mix of product, industrial designers, content, researchers, accessibility specialists. Who am I forgetting? UX developers, of course. And so we're dedicated to empower commerce at a global scale. So we provide solutions for people across Canada, US, Asia, and Europe. And we build products for merchants and entrepreneurs to start, manage their business. So life at Shopify, we work closely with product managers and engineers. We are given a problem, and we are given the autonomy to solve that at our own pace. We are also given time and space to develop our craft. So we're always learning something new. And we're always given the opportunity to connect with our users, so people who use our products, so we can learn from them. So that's kind of Shopify in a nutshell. So if you're interested to get connected with us and learn about the stuff that we do and the stuff that we build and our processes, check out our blog and then sign up for a newsletter. And if you're interested in working with us, check out our careers. So it's always, if you sign up for the newsletter, you get postings for careers, job postings as well. So I'll leave that up for a few seconds if you guys want to take pictures. And then I'll just turn it over to Johan from Contentful.
Hi. So I'm Johannes. I'm excited to be here and to... No worries. So it's a hard German name. I'm excited to be here and represent Contentful. Contentful is a headless CMS and content infrastructure. So you can use our web app or our content management API to manage and edit your content, and then using our content delivery API, you can use it in all your projects across platforms. And what I'm doing at Contentful is I'm a UI engineer at Contentful. So I basically built our open source design system, which is called Forma 36. Our company is based in Kreuzberg in Berlin, and the number of Kreuzberg in that area is 36. This is where the name is coming from. And what we do is we provide an open source design system for our customers and internal engineers to build extensions and to extend the application. Our web app is heavily extendable, so to have everything consistent, we provide that design system, a component library, and different resources. I and my colleague Mike, who is another UI engineer at Contentful, we evangelize systems thinking and mentor other engineers and designers in using our design system, and we prototype design solutions and experimental features. And we co-organize the design systems meetup in Berlin. So if you're around, let me know. We do a nice meetup at our Kreuzberg office. Exactly. So just some links if you want to get involved in Contentful, if you want to join us. We got a lot of positions open right now, engineering position and design positions. We accept PRs on our design system, Form 36. And you will find all infos about the meetup in Berlin on designsystems.berlin. All right, thank you.
Thank you. All right, so that's the agenda for today. The first talk is going to be by Laura, which is defining, strategizing, and starting your design system. The second talk is going to be scaling design systems by Eduardo at around 7:10 p.m. And the talk's end at 7:40. I think there's still some appetizers left, so feel free to grab them after. And the venue closes at 8, so you have 20 minutes to network. And I'm going to introduce Laura now. So Laura is a design leader with 10 plus years experience in digital design across agency and enterprise shops, working in visual design, UX design, product strategy. She's particularly obsessed with design systems, design ops, and creating consistent, effective brand experiences across multiple devices and platforms. She also uses her fondness of planning of systems into her love of quilting during her spare time. Also, Laura is starting a new position as Director of Product Design at Loblaws Digital next week. So if you want to talk about that and Loblaws Digital, there she is. Welcome, Laura.
That's cool. We'll get there. That's not me. It's the same color deck, though. I sent you a PDF.
In the industry, we call this buying time. Want to hear a joke?
It is the same color, though. See?
What is the opposite of pasta? Antipasti.
Is there a clicker? Okay. I can be tethered. Hi. So I'm Laura. Some of you might have seen this deck on LinkedIn. I posted it. The way I'm going to present today is we're not going to go through this necessarily as a presentation. It's not really written as a presentation. It's kind of more of a tool that I'm working on drafting out. And so I'm going to quickly run you all through it. And then it would be fantastic if on your own time at work tomorrow, spend a few minutes, really dig into it, maybe even try it and give me any feedback you have. I want to keep kind of trying to refine this and see if it goes somewhere that's useful. So starting a design system. This is a guide about doing. I think there's a lot of great conversations happening about design systems and what it means to have a system and how important it is to have a system. But once you get past that point, I find a lot of teams have a difficulty, and this includes ones that I've been on, starting. How do you actually start to deliver and execute on something without locking yourself in a room for 12 months and no one knows what your team is doing, and the design team starts to become resentful because they think that you're just making stuff up out of nowhere. So this is a framework to start creating something and getting it out and socialized as soon as possible. Okay, here we go. How you start. Also, one of the reasons why I decided to do it this way is because there's so many variables. Like, you could be a design team of one, like all-encompassing design team of one at a startup, and you know it's something you should be doing. Or you could work in large enterprise and have a design team of 300 people, and you're a person tasked to start it or on a team. So again, this framework hopefully will be flexible enough that it can actually give you solid advice, because otherwise it's too unique for every person what your situation is. So design systems or products, we all agree on this. They are a tool that you create that people use, and then they do something with it. But we talk about treating it like a product, having a team set up like a product, but we don't kickstart it like a product. We would never task a team to go in and create something and then let them just kind of go figure it out and then release something to their audience and kind of maybe get some feedback and no one really likes it, and then it sort of fizzles out. So we should be starting things with proper kickoffs using whatever framework you currently have for your product. I'm going to propose one here. Also, start small. Don't try and have a full-fledged system right away. You are not going to be correct. The same way, if you spend all your time fleshing out a giant product and releasing it, chances are you'd have a lot that you want to iterate on and change. So do it as soon as possible, release quickly, and something is better than nothing. Even if your system needs work, by releasing it to your internal teams, they can tell you what's wrong with it. They can tell you what they want to see. They can help you do that hard work. So rely on them to tell you, because they'll know a lot faster than you do what needs to change to help them do their jobs. So MVPs, who here is familiar creating MVPs? Most of us, good. MVPs aren't pretty and shiny and perfect and wonderful, but the idea of an MVP is just to get something in the hands of your users, which for you is mostly going to be your design team, your dev team, your product owners, and or your clients. Those are kind of loose categories. As soon as possible, so they can tell you how you're doing and give you feedback immediately. It is not a time to be precious and perfect about your design system. You'll have plenty of time for that later. So I made a pyramid. I always like to include a shape. I started making a pyramid. I was thinking about Brad Frost and the atomic design system. And I mean, at the time, the atomic design system was really helpful because no one had any idea what they were doing and how to begin to categorize things, but it's missing a lot of the things now that are still missing. So you might be here, a realm of whatever, where you don't have a system, you might not even have a product, you might not have designs, you just have stuff and you know you're supposed to do something. And so the way I look at it is, instead of being much more executional at this point in terms of like your buttons and your page layouts and things, you're looking for brand consistency is the first thing that you can do. That doesn't have to be everything, but it should be your high touch point basic components and or illustrations. Try and keep your tone of voice a little bit the same. Again, I'm really pleased that content is getting more involved in systems. I think you can have something that looks the same and it can be gorgeous, but if it feels like it's written by 5 different people, your customers are going to be equally as disappointed with you as they are if every single page they go to looks different. So brand consistency, and then next goal, singular experience consistency. Even if your product's all over the place, it can go miles if your sign-up flow or something similar to that is consistent, so you can start having chunks that are correct, and slowly you can work to fill in the gaps. Because even this is better than having, a little bit of this flow, a little bit of that flow. Work to try and get, dare we say, journeys, small journeys, correct, and looking and feeling the same in your product. From there, you can start looking into cross-platform. So digital to mobile, mobile to smart TV, everything else in between. Super cool. Try and make everything feel, look, sound the same. And then singular voice. This is something that I believe Eduardo is going to be touching on. And so it's sort of the holy grail of design. It may or may not exist. It's where you can start really bridging physical experiences to digital experiences and everything else in between. So that goes beyond like out of home. That starts where you start thinking about brands like Casper, where you go into a store, you have the experience of looking and touching and feeling in a heavily branded store, a very controlled tone of voice. And then from there, digitally, you go and you do your transactions either independently or you can do them there. But it's seamless integration. And so that's what you're looking for in what I think is the system of systems. It covers everything. So that would also be full integrations with the brand team and the marketing team, which are generally challenging things to do. But again, I think that these are gaps that we can look at. Okay. So I'm going to go through these uncomfortably fast, and for that I apologize, but I'm kind of wordy once I get writing. Number one thing you have to do is, if you have a product, audit it. There's no way that you can start to design it unless you really understand what you're looking at. And it doesn't mean talking to every person who designed everything. It can be just by yourself, going through the site, screen capping like all the CTAs, and then put them in a deck and just be like, how many buttons do I have? That is a really valuable thing to do, but auditing should no longer be spent than 1 week, right? And that's not working your nights, that's not trying to do everything. If you can't do it in working hours in a week, your scope is definitely too big for your MVP design system. You need to roll it back a little bit. So I would recommend, if you have multiple brands, start with one. Can you do it in a week? You still can't do it in a week? It happens. Tackle a flow. Tackle a section of the site. Start small. Because if you're auditing for a month, you're going to get really weird by the end of it, and you're going to just be thinking of like buttons and tables, and all of a sudden you'll see the mountain is this big, and that's a mountain that's much harder to climb than one that's this big, right? And because again, you need to get things out to your team quickly, because also, frankly, it can be hard to get buy-in for a design system at a large company, and people are going to be turning an eye to the team, and they're going to be like, so what exactly is your output? When is this really going to happen? So it's going to be really helpful for your stakeholders outside the design team, your VPs, your execs, whoever is actually funding it, to start seeing things quickly. Socially, that's going to help you. So audit, time box it, tell everyone what your time box is, and at the end of it, tell everyone what the scope was. Define your MVP. Is anyone familiar, with a IBM Hill statement? It's like a kickoff statement. It's usually like defining your audience and what you're going to do and how it's going to be fantastic. It's a great framework, but I kind of am basing a statement. We're going to hit the next page on that. And so what I'm giving you guys is here it is. What's a hill statement? Right. A well-formed hill frames a problem in a way that drives user outcomes. Hills are statements of intent, written as meaningful user outcomes. They tell you where to go, not how to get there. So I'm going to help you use a tool that I kind of stole from them and changed a little bit to help you figure out where you're going and what you need to do to actually get there. Our MVP design system will need, so that we can goal. So your needs are going to be three things that you want to do. I have a big list of them. And one singular goal. Unfortunately, you're unlikely to hit more than one goal with your MVP. And again, if you're hitting multiple goals with your first draft MVP, it's not an MVP. And that means that that's time you could have spent releasing even faster. So needs, I've done a draft of needs here. I'm really, really interested in getting more from people and learning about what other people's experiences are. These are all in the appendix, linked to different tasks that you can actually do. So for every need that you put in your statement, it's going to give you a list of actual things that you can put on your roadmap that you're going to do to meet those needs. So needs can be reducing design tools, component consistency, live demoing components. Again, all of these are valuable parts of the system, but you have to start smaller rather than spread your efforts so wide it's kind of vague and uncertain. By focusing in on just a couple of things, you'll be able to do them much better. So it's tough, and we want them all, but there's always time. And some of the goals are modular design, so future-proofing, making sure you can add and remove features, predictable CX, accurately branded experience, defined brand, 2 separate tasks, increase delivery speed, eliminate rogue decisions by the design team, create a more inclusive product, governance tool, rallying point for the design system, and to kind of stop the pixel pushing either for yourself or your wider team so you can, focus on a better customer experience. So next step is you assess your needs versus goals. So when you fill it in, you're going to kind of take a quick look here. Here's an example. Our design system will improve our dev relationship, be a showpiece of our design culture, and whittle down design tools so that we can create an accessible product. That's amazing, but that's after several years of work. So to be able to do this successfully, you need to make sure that your your needs are mapping to your goal. And this is something you should do with members outside the design team as well, so that they understand you can only do so much right away. So like one that would work, provide tone of voice consistency, define our visual brand, define our design principles so that you can have an accurately branded experience. So this tool is as much to socialize what you're doing, pull other people on board, as it is to check yourself and make sure it's like, do I have a rogue need here that doesn't actually map to this goal? Maybe you need to change it so that you're creating something that's achievable. And then you map your needs to tasks. This is the stuff I really also want your feedback on. So each of these, there's a few pages talking about, say, meeting AA criteria. These are things that you can do. Defining usage rules and specs. These are things that you can do. Improving your dev relationship. And they, for lack of a better term, they go on and on and on. But again, I really need the community to help me kind of improve these, make them a little bit more succinct so that we can have a flexible framework that hopefully someone else can use. And then you map your goals to your audience. So then you have your goal. And although it might seem obvious that, a client's external, and so you have an external audience, that's your immediate audience. So that is very different than having an internal audience, which would be, say, for example, your design team. If you're working on something internally, that's the time to stop and be like, what do we call a button? Do we call it a CTA? Do we call it the blue button? Do we call it the primary CTA? Like, that's the time to have those conversations. If your focus for MVP is changing the client experience, save those conversations for later. Just focus on the surface, on the aesthetics, and like, just goal is launch, to get things out in front of your customer rather than sorting out internally whatever chaos you may have in your internal design team. It sounds obvious, but if you try and do both those things at the same time, it can really lag you down. And I think a lot of us working in systems have experienced how long people can take talking about what to call something. And sometimes that has to be a conversation that you have specific time and bandwidth put aside for. And until then, just call it whatever you like. And then you put it all together. So you have an MVP statement, what, defined audience, who, and some tasks that you can do, or how, to create your design system. Because it's super easy, right? So basically at the end of it, you can have something like this after your basic kickoff meeting very quickly to be able to share and socialize and also show whoever you finally convinced that you need a design system. This is who it's for immediately. Even better, if you can attach a date to this, that'll make people very happy. Saying exactly what it's going to do, what the goal of the short-term design system MVP is going to be, and what you need to do to get it done. So you're going to do this. This is how you're going to do it. This is who it's for. Attach a date. And it should make a lot of wary people actually very happy. Even if you do this tool ahead of time, I think it will also be really valuable for buy-in. Because then you can say, we want to create an MVP to do X, Y, Z. Can we get permission to do this? Can we get funding to do it? And then just see where it goes. Can you give us a month? Can you give us a month and a half? And just do an experiment. Chances are at the end of the experiment, it will prove useful, as it does. It's not the most complicated thing in the world, how and why. It saves everyone time and money and efficiency, but those can be really hard things to quantify. So this might be helpful if you can also frame it as kind of like an experiment and get something out the door. And I think, I want to do this better. I want to keep doing it. I want to keep writing about it. I have a few ideas that I've talked to the community about where I want to go with it next. But on this tool specifically, if you have any feedback, please give it to me. And any additions that you think are valuable, and any ideas about other things you want me to touch on. I think the next things I'm going to touch on, aside from refining this, is talking about tone of voice and brand integration. I think that there is a bit of a gap between the design we do, moving extremely technical, versus the designy designer in us, which is kind of the aura of a brand that we're presenting with a softer touch, which is becoming more and more important. So I'm kind of interested in that spot. Anyways, I think I'm done talking very quickly, and I'd be happy to take some questions.
Cool. Let's do it. Thank you, first of all, Laura. It was a great
You're
talk.
welcome.
Appreciate that.
I'm very caffeinated. Sorry. It's been a day.
Hi, Laura. I'm
Hi.
Sujin from RBC Ventures.
Hello.
So I've been really struggling to get some buy-in and from the dev team. So I spoke to 10 different tech leads. They're all interested. But when it comes down to a dev resource, it has been really, really hard. So any advice how I can get about it? Because I was able to align 14 different designers.
Yeah.
But dev, like design system cannot flourish without the component library. So yeah.
I've never heard of anyone having trouble getting dev to buy in. This is new. I would recommend, although that these are things that maybe you've done, is showing them best-in-class examples, asking them what you could possibly do that would help them work faster. Because then if you kind of can angle some of your work and sort of give some concessions to them of special things they want, maybe it can entice them a little bit more. I also recommend you speak with Nadia, who spoke here last week, she is the product design lead of the RBC digital design system. She's really good. She might be able to help you, but I kind of like call it like the cookies on a plate. And you're sort of like, what would you really like to see? And kind of prioritize some of the things that they would like. And if you can roll that into your roadmap for them, that generally goes a long way. It's a little bit of strategy.
Hello, I'm Bruno from Habanero Consulting, experienced designer. We are creating our new version of design system, and I'm seeing the rollout strategy in two different ways. So the first one is you sell the big picture for the managers, for example, and then you define the scope for a very specific piece, or you keep it secret in your design team and then show just a piece and then it start to grow and grow from there. So what's your comment related to these two different strategies? Any recommendations, ideas?
The more painful approach is to socialize it heavily and release it piece by piece so everyone can see it. Although, you know, especially if you're seasoned with design systems and you really know what you're doing, you might feel really confident that we're going to go and hide and just do it. The work will be socialized much more poorly, although the work might be better. And if it's socialized poorly, no one's going to be interested in it. So I really recommend that you try and make it as collaborative and super open as possible, and even doing it little piece by little piece. If it means that people are on board with what you're doing, that's great. But to be clear, it's sharing with them and soliciting their feedback, but that by no means you have to use that feedback, or it's not a design by consensus sort of thing. It's more of like participation. And you know, the same way with a product, just because one or two customers doesn't like that color doesn't mean you get rid of it. It just, some people don't like that color.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Questions?
Really? Okay. Oh.
There's one.
Hello, my name is Helen. I'm self-employed and I'm UX designer, and actually I'm creating right now a design system for one of my projects. And we're talking about creating, and what about finalizing? What about your recommendation? How I can, for example, set my goal and you know, like just see my sorry, and like, you know, and see valuable what I'm doing, like in this current point, for example. Okay, what I mean that how I can evaluate when I finished.
Thank you. I did not include that. Thank you for that. Yeah, closing the feedback loop, right? Something I forgot to do. So like anything else, when you release an MVP, you want to make sure that you can get feedback. So some things that I would probably recommend, I should think a little bit more about that, is it can be as simple as an email if it's internal, just asking people how they feel, post it on your team Slack or whatever you may have. You can do it a little bit more formally as well if your MVP is hosted live, which in some situations makes more sense. Including like a commenting thing right on it that people can submit while they're looking at it is also very helpful.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. I will work on that.
Cool. Last question. Okay, I think we're good then. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
All right, I think it's time for the next talk. It's going to be Scaling Design Systems Inclusively, and it's by Eduardo. Eduardo is the Director of Global Design Systems at Scotiabank. His purpose is to help transform their world into a happier place for everyone, and that's why he's passionate about unlocking the exponential power of design systems. Eduardo moved from Peru early this year and is constantly playing with local ingredients to continue learning how to cook delicious Peruvian food that also brings joy moments to the table. Welcome.
Thank you. Hey guys, can you hear me well? So I'm super excited to be here. Scotia has been working around 3 years almost in Canvas. So I'm super excited to be sharing a little bit of what we've been working on. And let's start with the story of Canvas. So back in the days, this is around 2016, this is what applications in different countries where Scotiabank were looking like. You can see apps from Mexico, Colombia, Chile, Peru, Canada, of course. And you can see that there's a lot going on here, a lot of inconsistency, a lot of just, different tones of red, icons, everything. Everything's kind of different, right? And so there was a big challenge back then. Scotiabank at that time decided to start its digital factory initiative, digital transformation, and it decided to take on a different approach. And so it started building 5 different digital factories in strategic locations, one in Canada, Mexico, Colombia, Chile, and Peru. And that's where everything started when it comes to the digital initiative. And that's around when Canvas was born. So I have a video, hoping the audio sounds, but I'm just gonna play it.
We are a global financial institution with over 90,000 people creating best-in-class experiences for our customers. But with so many teams, things can start to get messy. We brought design and engineering together to create a global design system for a unified experience across all our markets. We call it Canvas. It's scalable, accessible, and easily adaptable. Canvas is a component pattern-based design system.
That's how it works.
It started small, and now Canvas is a living, breathing, cross-platform global design system used by 50 agile teams, 80 UX designers, and over 200 engineers building customer-facing digital products around the world. Canvas empowers us to build world-class digital experiences that are consistent across multiple channels for over 25 million customers worldwide and counting. With a global system that's built to scale, we're ready for whatever comes next.
And really, this video was done around August, I think. So numbers are not updated. It's been really a lot of evolution, learning, and of course impact. And so this is how things are looking like now. These are 5 applications from 5 different countries. Right now, Canvas has helped teams in 5 countries build applications for over, as you saw in the video, 15 countries. So it's been massive. The impact has been massive. And really, we're at a point where we're like, what's next, right? So Canvas is Scotiabank's global design system. And it exists to help teams at Scotia build world-class digital experiences fast. That's why we exist. And this is our purpose statement. And so we've been really working on bringing libraries. We started with design. The Sketch library was one of the first ones. And then we started working on the engineering side with React, and then iOS and Android native. So we have 4 different libraries and around 30 components if you make an average. And so there's over 90 projects already using Canvas in 5 countries. And this has been massive. And we've started measuring what's the impact of this. So how do you start really seeing what's the benefit the organization can have of this? You can measure it in different ways. One of those ways is by measuring what's the actual efficiency, what's the business impact that the design system brings. And we've been able to measure that Canvas has saved the bank over 1 million Canadian dollars in just 2 years. So it's been really, really massive. And this has obviously helped us to get the ball rolling faster. And so we're in a point where it was like, yes, things are going well. There's obviously opportunities to continue improving. There's always opportunities to continue improving. But we're just kind of like incrementally evolving things. How do we start thinking of how to have a little bit more of this disruptive innovation? How do we start thinking of what else can we do? right? So what's next for Canvas? And this is a question we've been asking ourselves for the last few months. What's next? So what do we do now? Of course, we're working to improve our contribution processes. We're working to get more people onboarded. We're working on the typical things that design system teams work on. But what else? What else can we bring to the table? And that's why we've started kind of questioning where can we go next? And we wanted to make that in a way that it's shareable so that we can benefit from that, but we can also share with the community. So that if you guys want to use this, you can also use it as a framework, as a process to guide your decisions. And so what I'm going to share with you today is what I call the design system scaling framework. It's a very simple framework that with 5 steps will help you make super strategic decisions of where to scale next. So let's start. This is what it looks like. So we're going to go through the 5 stages. I'm going to start with the first one. And so this is starting with, let's define winning. We talk a lot about what winning means. What's the main goal for your design system? So let's start defining winning. I think there's a lot of things that we have in our heads that kind of predefine what winning can mean. It really doesn't mean, in the case of design systems, to be better at something, the best at something, sorry. It means to be better at certain things that we determine. There's always that kind of preset idea of comparing to someone else, to the competition, whatever. That's what companies usually do. In design systems, there's so many different things. It's so embedded in the culture. There's so particularities that it doesn't really make sense to compare each other. And that's why we're trying to be as open and share as much with the community, because it's really about how do we help each other to grow. And so let's define winning by answering 2 questions. And the first one is, why does your design system exist? What's the purpose? What's the main purpose of your design system? So start by defining what's the purpose. And the purpose really helps you to guide every single decision you make. So for example, and I showed you this before, Canvas exists to help teams at Scotia build world-class digital experiences fast. And that's something that we repeat every time we can, and it's super embedded in our, obviously, decision-making process, but in our internal culture as well. So that helps us really guide decisions. The second question is, how are you measuring success? So what are the goals that you need to that you're gonna commit to, right? So Laura has been talking a lot about this, but it's really important to really define what those goals are, so you can be super sharp, focused in kind of targeting to measure those goals. So for example, in the case of Canvas, consistency, accessibility, on brand experiences are definitely goals we have, and also improve time to market for teams. And I like to see this one as the kind of the overarching goal, save money to the organization by reusing stuff. So really you can start measuring and defining those goals, and that's how you need to start measuring your success. So it really depends on what you define. The second piece of the framework is understand your context. And this is a very important part, because every context is different in every organization. It's super important to understand where you are and where you can go. So there's 4 questions I have here to guide this piece of the framework. And the first one is, what's your organization? How's your organization structured? So literally, this is something you can go and do some research, like literally look at the org charts, look where it's standing within the full organization, how the organization is structured, what business lines exist, what possibilities do you have within the organization. So that's a first one. The second one is, how's your team configured? You can really, that's an easy one, right? You're sitting next to them, you know how the team's configured, so that's definitely a good starting point. And from there, you can see what do you feel, depending on the goals you've defined, what do you feel you're missing, and where do you start building those relationships, those partnerships, right? And the third one is who are your users? From what teams, right? We don't get to work directly to produce customer-facing experiences, but we definitely work with teams very closely for them to produce those experiences. So who are those teams? Who are those people working on them? Who are your users? Are they just UX designers? Are there front-end devs? Front-end devs for the website, for the mobile side? So who are your users? That's a very important piece of the puzzle. And then the number 4 is what customer groups are you focusing on? Again, your company probably serves multiple customer groups, right? In the case of Canvas, we started with personal banking. So Scotia serves multiple types of customers, wealth, corporate banking customers, and personal banking customers, of course. We started with personal banking customers because Digital Factory started serving those customers. So this is kind of the context where we existed. And really understanding that gives you a possibility to start looking what other spaces do you have to start impacting next. And this is just a simple kind of diagram to help you map those last 2 questions. What are your users, teams, and customers that you're serving? So those are the first 2 steps. Number 3, and this is where what I feel is the core of the framework. This is where you start uncovering opportunity spaces. So after doing some analysis and understanding where you're sitting at and where you are within your organization, what's your context, you need to start seeing where can you go next. And what I've discovered here is that there's multiple opportunities when you think of where you can scale. I think there's like 4 dimensions. There might be more. I have just uncovered 4. But I'm happy to learn from you if there's any other thing you've seen. And I feel these are the 4 dimensions you can scale to. The first one is to new customer groups, right? As we were saying, depends on what customers you're serving. In the case of Canvas, personal, what other customer segments do we have? In this case, we could serve either corporate banking. In fact, we're working very closely with them. In fact, there's a team around here that's working closely with Canvas. And also wealth, that's another potential customer group, right? Number 2, go deeper into the libraries. Continue improving the libraries, continue refining, pruning, adding things, getting contributors to add more stuff into the libraries. Number 3, go wider into customer journey scope. And we're going to see what that looks like. And number 4, go higher in component complexity. And so to map this out, I've created a very simple diagram. I promise it's not a 4-dimensional diagram. It's a very simple diagram to help you understand what those opportunity spaces are. And so this is how it looks like. In the x-axis, you can see the customer journey. And there's a little line there separating customers from potential customers, like the public space from the authenticated space. Usually, it depends if your company works in that way. Usually, there's an authenticated and unauthenticated. And then the complexity, which is the y-axis. So this is what I call the opportunity map. And this definitely helps you to start understanding where are you located, where's your design system located within this map, and what are the opportunities out there. So in the case of Canvas, again, I feel we started with a kind of thin layer of guidelines, the very basics of accessibility in our case, of brand, of content, of spacing, of font, of all those definitions. And then we continued with the component layer. And these layers are always evolving. Like there's back and forth, as you learn and continue adding things, you start kind of refining your guidelines all the time. It's not a static thing. And in the components layer, there's obviously the UI components, or all of the libraries you would expect. In our case, iOS, Android, Sketch, and React. And then we're starting to work on a new layer, which we're calling templates. So we're starting to actually figure out not just UI components, but full pages. In our case, we've started with email templates. So what does that look like? How do we start facilitating the work of engineers and designers so that they can start producing emails faster and with better quality? And so you can see that the map has a lot of white space still. There's a lot of opportunity spaces that still exist. So let's see what What are some of them? I was saying before that another customer group that we could serve is wealth, for example, and that's something we've been kind of arguing and trying to understand. And so what does that mean? We could definitely create new libraries for the wealth group. That would probably imply another team and a lot of effort. So what do we need to do if we don't want to create new libraries from scratch? And that's where, for example, we could have this space where we could kind of theme the components and start having a thin layer of theme that could bring in the wealth brand as well. And there's also some space up there, space we're calling user flows or flows. As you saw, there's a lot of experiences being built in multiple countries. And again, context, right? This is very particular to our context. But how do we start helping those teams create experiences that are faster and that are consistent, not starting from scratch every time, not just starting with UI components, but starting from flows that are similar and that they can refine, evolve, but that makes sense. Again, that's another opportunity space. And then we have another opportunity space at the left, which is more in the marketing.com side. And it's a different, and you can see that there are different blocks because of the tech stack. .com uses AEM, which is a CMS, and so the same library wouldn't work because we have React on the website, so it's not compatible, right? So it's a different tech stack, so you would need different libraries in that case. So in that case, you could have, again, themes and components and templates that would be specific for the .com. And so you can see that there's opportunities on the customer journey side, opportunities on the complexity side. And I think that as you start going up, it's not just more complex components, but it gets more complex to build them as well. The technology piece is more complex. It's more complicated to build reusable user flows. So really the challenges start growing as you go up. But potentially you could have more impact. And it depends, again, of what's the user base that you have. What potential users could you have for using those same things? If you're going to be taking forever to add one user flow and there's just one other team that will be using that, what's kind of the impact that you can have there? And that's something we're going to be talking next. So that's the third step of the design system scaling framework. And then the fourth step is actually getting into defining strategic scenarios. So we've identified some opportunity spaces. And now let's start thinking about how do we start actually drafting something? How do we start kind of planning something? And so this is what the fourth step is for. And so here we're going to start by drafting some scenarios. And in this case, this is a very simple table that could help you with that, which answers 4 questions. The first one is what? So what are you trying to address? What's the opportunity you're trying to address? For example, let's give you the example of the wealth group. We're trying to add compatibility for the wealth teams to start creating components with Canvas. So that's the what. Okay, how? What's our proposed solution? Oh, we're thinking of theming Canvas. Who's going to be impacted by that? We're thinking that obviously customers from the wealth group, users, we have some teams we've identified, UX designers, some front-end devs that we've identified. Teams, of course, those users are part of those teams. And then partners. What are the potential partners? Of course, we have the wealth group as a potential partner, and we've already started working, figuring out what that looks like, but also the brand team. What does that partnership look like, right? It's really important to start figuring out what those partners are very early in the process so you can know who do you work with. If there's any tweaks you need to do to the brand, you need to work with the brand team so that you're kind of on the same page and the guidelines are all aligned. And then how much, and this is a very important piece, how much do you need to invest if you need to jump into this opportunity space? And what's the estimated impact you can have? And I think that's critical if you want to evaluate a new opportunity space, that the estimated impact is as big as possible. You want to have as much impact as possible with the least effort, right? This is kind of little bonus off track, but important as well. So how do you start measuring the impact? And this is a very simple formula that can help you. We've, in fact, used this formula to get to the over 1 million in savings in a different way because we're using real data, but in essence, it's the same way of calculating the number. So let's start with some variables. The first one is, let's start thinking of what are the potential teams that could use that, that new solution that you're creating. And once you start figuring out what those teams are, how many projects would those teams start producing? Are they projects? Are they products? For the sake of this, we're calling them projects because projects start and end, and then kind of teams can continue working with different projects. Some teams will be product teams, so they will be working on one product through the life cycle of that team. And so how many projects would that team be overseeing, or how many projects in general would be affected or benefited by this? Second variable is how many components would be reused? How many components are you thinking of adding there? Think of, like, again, MVP. What's the MVP of that? What's the minimum needed set of components that you would need to add? And number three, what's the cost of those components? How do you start measuring, maybe this is an estimate again, right? So the average between the least complex component to the potentially more complex component in that subset of components. But the important thing in here is that you need to consider that cost, not from the design system team perspective, but from the user team perspective. What is that cost if that team that would be using that would have? So, configuration from the design team might be a little different. You might have more senior people. It really depends on how the company configures the team. But usually, the configuration is different from a product team. So you want to make sure that this number comes from the product team configuration, because that's really the money you're saving from the team, right? And so this is pretty simple. You basically multiply, and then you get a number. You get money out of that formula, right? So it's a pretty simple formula. Again, there's assumptions here, and obviously as any model, it has its assumptions. But as you start getting real numbers into this, you can start using it to really measure the impact of your design system. In this case, we're using it more for estimation purposes. So that's this step number 4. And then step number 5 is, let's test, learn, and choose. So we've identified some scenarios. So how do we now start seeing what works better, or what path could we take next? And this is where I don't want to get too deep into testing, tools and stuff. There's so many tools that I'm sure you guys are more experienced using than me. But you have, on the lo-fi side, you have, the simplest thing you could do is that little table, make it into a PowerPoint presentation, keynote presentation, whatever you want to call it. Go with stakeholders, go with potential partners, go with potential users. Go through it, try to probe them, see how they feel about this, see how they feel about the numbers that are there, potential impact and all of that, and start seeing if you get any reactions, any buy-in from them. So that's kind of the simplest thing you could do. It shouldn't take you too long. And you can start testing some of those scenarios and see what starts sticking. And then on the other side, which is more on the hi-fi side, you can actually build something and test it, right? You can, if you have a team, you can spend some time, sprint, whatever, build something, test it out, see how that performs, and then come back and tweak. So those are kind of the two sides of testing and learning. And obviously, in the end, you need to make a choice. So what path are you going to take? Is it going to be one path? Is it going to be two paths? Obviously, if it's going to be more than one path, what do you need to get back? Is there an investment that you need to make? Where is that money coming from? So it's really important that you decide in the end and not just continue experimenting forever with the finite resources, because obviously you need to focus on something, right? So what do you learn throughout these experiments, and what would have to be true so that these experiments or these scenarios could become possible? And this is where you start getting into potential barriers. If there's any reaction that wasn't too positive that you got from a stakeholder, then maybe that's a potential barrier. Why? Why is that a barrier? So how do you start getting into really understanding what's behind that person's mind? What are his kind of worries, and how do you work with that person in kind of like taking that those barriers from their way? And finally, I think that it's really important that you aim for impact. In the end, design systems, the point is that you produce as much impact with the least investment possible. You don't want your team to grow into 40, 50 people. Depends on the company, context again. But you want to make sure that the resources you're investing in this scenario, whatever it is, were invested so you can have as much impact as possible, right? So this is kind of how the framework works. In the end, the idea is that this is a cycle, so you can go back and, again, think of, is the purpose evolving through this, going through this experiment? Are my goals evolving? Sometimes they might, sometimes they won't, but still kind of asking those questions will help you make sure you're creating the right things and measuring them right. So really, in the end, as you've seen, it's super important that you identify who are the persons you're going to be working with from the start and in every single part of the process, because we feel that really when we talk about inclusive solutions, it's not just for who we design, but who we design those solutions with. So involving people throughout the way is really going to help you create inclusive solutions that everyone will love. So yeah, that's it, and thank you.
All right, questions. Thank you, Eduardo.
Thanks.
Hi. I just wonder, so I know Scotiabank is a global company, so there's different country and then multiple projects they're working on, and then a bunch of UI UX designer in different country, right? So that time, maybe some language, the UI component may not working, and they may tweak a little bit, and then without like tell you anybody, and then design something. So do you have any regulation or audit like to manage all the design is like keep consistent? Yeah.
Yeah, there's regulations, and that's why Scotia decided to, it's a bank in the end, right? That's why Scotia decided to go through a different path. Instead of like trying to build something that works for everyone, there were 5 digital factories that were built in strategic locations. So that's why like Scotia decided to go in that direction, and that kind of shaped how we're building the design system, because again, context, right? But yeah, there's different regulations in every country, so there's a lot of things that change and that obviously influence how we build things. In the case of we really have a strong accessibility practice within Scotia, and it's a very inclusive organization. But now in Canada, for example, there's a big regulation around accessible experiences, right? That necessarily isn't the case in all countries, but still, Scotia is pushing for building inclusive experiences everywhere. And so really it depends on what are the values, what are the kind of goals, what are you trying to achieve, and how do you tackle those things so that you can achieve them.
Thank you. Hi, Paul Eisen. I'm an independent at the moment, UX strategy and design. So, and I don't know where Laura is, but I'm just...
She's there somewhere.
Laura, where are you? Just
Laura's down
really
here.
Appreciate both Eduardo and Laura what you presented around kind of the framework and some of the objectives, etc. Hey, Laura. I have a question around, I feel like we are all assuming that these design systems are actually systems representing effective designs. But I haven't heard from you, and I'm curious about how you make those trade-offs between as you're thinking about these design systems, it's kind of an art, right? The sophistication and the amount of choice that you leave for your audience to build their designs versus the control that you want to do to make sure that they're not going kind of crazy. And I think we did something like that with P&G back at Sapient Days, if you recall. I'm just curious about how you guys address that, and then how do you govern it to make sure that it's not just brand consistent, it's not just aligned, and it's not just the same, but it's actually effective?
Who wants to go first? I'm going to say from a broader perspective, since I have a lot to say about it. Since I'm talking today from the perspective of starting a new system, I'm going to talk about starting your governance and how you go about doing that. And I think the first thing is you do want to have an idea of, first of all, like when you do your audit, you'll discover how dark is it, right? Like how much help do you actually need? And if you need a lot of help, then I would recommend that you start governing with a very heavy hand. I think a lot of that's going to come from the senior leadership as well. What's their take on it? Do they see that it's a problem? Do they not? There are some places, and I have talked to a lot of places, what's their governance model? Some places are like, if designers repeatedly do not adhere to it and it's a company priority, it is a fundamental part of your job and you are not performing. Other places are a little bit more vague about it and, kind of want to still give people the freedom. But again, the freedom does come with inconsistencies. So it's tough, Like I frame it for designers in the pixels, the majority of the parts of the system, the tone of voice, the approved content, the accessibility needs are set in stone. What's not set in stone and what is the future of a role in design is solving the problem at hand and exploring the psychological needs of your users and how they're receptive to things and are the tasks getting completed on time. But a lot of designers will hate me saying that, but I really do think that the problems a system solves shouldn't be the reasons that we have designers staffed. Is that?
Yeah. I also think that it's an ongoing thing, right? It's something that will be evolving. Sometimes, like, you set something at the start, and you're gonna see that some things work from that kind of solution you came with, but things evolved, and you need to evolve your governance model, whatever you want to call it. So I think it's a kind of an ongoing process. In our case, we had, for example, a kind of summit in January where we brought up representatives from every country. We call them the Canvas reps, inspired on Telus design system ambassadors. So that's where we learned. That's the whole point of this. Like we got Canvas reps from every country coming in, and we decided all together to go with a governance model. And we tried it through these months. We've been trying to kind of make it work, make contribution work. And in the process of doing that, you start learning and you start seeing what things work, what things don't work. I think it's really important to say too that you want to build really strong partnerships. You want to be really close to your users, because sometimes when you kind of like just close the doors and say this is how it is, you start getting people going their own way, and you want to make sure that people are working with you, right? So there's a very kind of like fine line between determining some rules and getting people to respect them, but also getting people to respect you and your decisions. I think there's the human aspect of this, right? It's a system in the end, but it's all about human relations. So how do you start building those human relations so that people are on your side? It's a very important part of the design system in the end.
I could give a whole presentation about this. I'm sure there will be one by someone else soon.
Questions?
Hi, for Eduardo, the formula you just put up for quantifying like the value of the design system, that seems pretty important for buy-in. One of the questions I had was, you said basically multiply the projects that the team is doing by, and the people on those projects by the number of components. How much is a component worth in that, though? Is it like 1 week of effort? Is it 2 weeks of effort?
You have
How
to
do you
define
quantify that?
That's what you have to define.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, like.
I want a number.
No, it really depends on the team. It really depends on how long the team takes to put something out, right? So it really depends on what the complexity of a component is. A label or a button isn't the same as a date picker component. Like you're gonna take maybe 1 month, I don't know, to build a date picker component. You're gonna take maybe a week or 2 weeks to build a button. Depends on what the process is and everything, right? So yeah, I'd say this is where you wanna go out and talk to teams and kind of see how long it's taking them. Obviously, it's assumptions as well, but in the end, it's an estimation. You wanna get as close as possible. So you wanna try and get as much data as possible to make a informed decision.
Okay, so what if you're competing with Bootstrap, where the answer is it takes 0 seconds to create a button?
So, and that's a good point, because, and I remember going back a little bit, back when I was in Peru, the team started with, before Canvas was on the kind of mobile space and web space, it was mostly on the design side. The team decided that, to get started fast, they would use material design system. So they basically started theming everything to look like Canvas, because there wasn't an actual library for the team to use. So everything started kind of looking like Canvas. But what ended up happening is there's a big overhead in those libraries. And as time goes by, there's a lot of maintenance that you need to go back and kind of like change, update the version, and like things break, and then you're having to like kind of like go back and do regression testings and make sure that everything's working fine. So there's kind of the impact in time as well. That's very important when you're making the decision. So that's something to bring up to a conversation for sure.
We have time for one more question.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you again for your presentation. It was awesome.
Thanks.
I'm still very interested about governance. I think that's one of the biggest challenges for a design system. I'm just curious about your technique in how to build the user voice, a community around it, and also what's the size of your team to maintain this design system that you just showed.
Wow. Again, I think this could be a full presentation, but I'll try to summarize it in a minute or two. So again, context, right? So the team configuration is we have designers and engineers within the team. We have a lead visual designer and an architect on the engineering side. And we also have UI, UX designers on the design side, accessibility specialists working very closely with the team. Not a full-time role, but definitely a role that comes in at key moments. Very close partnership with accessibility. We have Monica here, the director for accessibility, sitting back there. Very close relation, very good partnership. And we have a QA person part-time again. On the engineering side, we also have 2 React developers and 1 iOS, 1 Android native dev. Each library needs their own person to maintain it, at least one. Depends on how many projects and how much demand there is for the libraries, that you need to kind of like see how many people you need for each side. Honestly, it's a right percentage. We have our architect here, Conway. I want to say like 70%, if not a little less, around 70% of the projects that are using, of those 90 projects I showed, are reusing the Canvas components from the React side. So obviously we need more bandwidth from the React side because there's more things that people need. And so starting to measure those things gives you a lot of information when it comes to how do you want to configure your team. And again, how do you want to prove to stakeholders what's the value of those libraries, of those investments, right? So that's from the resource side. That's how the team is configured. We have a BA right now too. I'm on the PO role, so just so you get the full perspective. And then from the governance side, really the design system libraries are released by the design system team. That's one of the kind of key pieces of the governance puzzle. You don't want people releasing your library whenever they want with whatever they want. You want to be that door person that releases things to the world. And you want to have a regular cycle. And you want to have some type of update to the community. So we have a monthly session. In our case, it's a monthly update session with the community where we kind of present all the updates to the community and make sure that at least one of the reps from every team from every country are participating in that, and kind of bringing information back to their teams, right? You want to have that because things are changing all the time. And so that's kind of the update cycle. And contribution-wise, we've opened the gates earlier this year. And we're still figuring it out. I think tools from the design side are still maturing. There's a lot of excitement when it comes to Figma and all of that. But it's been really hard to engage with them and get that, like an organization account. So it's been really tricky when it comes to the tools. If you want to have contribution and streamline that process, you need to have the proper tools. So how does someone submit something? How do you kind of encourage people to submit? What's the award or reward program behind that to kind of get people, or the measuring goal part? And that's where you need to get with kind of stakeholders to figure out, is this going to be a performance thing that we're going to measure in people's yearly performance review? So you need to start kind of figuring out how to actually make this contribution piece work. And you obviously need to have some quality standards that you set so that people know what to send and how to send their things, right? So there's a lot there. I think I've touched on different things. Again, I think this could be a talk of its own, and I'm sure the team is working on it or something. But yeah, I'd be happy to talk with you more about that. Thank you, guys. I don't want to take too much time. So yeah, again, I'm going to share this with the community. Again, this is a work in progress, as always, framework. So if you have any feedback, ideas of how to improve it, please reach out. I'd be happy to work with you.
Thanks, Eduardo. Thank you. Thanks, Laura. We'll do our best to make these resources available to you soon. Okay, we're going to bring back our slides really quick for closing remarks. And that's all the time we've got. I'm kidding. We have time for networking. The venue closes at 8 o'clock p.m. And we're going to just briefly announce our January meetup, along with some other fascinating news. Lucy, come on over. Are we going to do the thing where we shake the cursor and it gets really big? This is the title of our next meetup. We're going to announce this on all the social media networks and meetup.com soon, once we finalize the planning. We're probably going for a slightly different style than your typical speaking to you. We're thinking maybe roundtable format, lots of questions and interaction in the year 2020. So you might find us experimenting with different formats. And we're very welcoming to feedback and suggestions. Thank you very much for attending. Please, if you have a cell phone that has, let's say, a Google phone with Google Lens, scan that QR code. If you have an iPhone, hold up your camera up to that, and please fill this very, very brief. I think it takes 27 seconds to fill. And send us your feedback. Let us know how you felt about today's talk. Follow us on social media, Design Systems C on Twitter, Design Systems Community on Instagram, or our website, designsystems.community. And we hope to share with you all the things. Thank you very much.